Hello. The Divine Code reading for March 18th, pages 569 and 570. We are in the chapter, The Prohibition of Theft. And continuing in topic number 4. Topic number 4 is discussing the question of the minimum quantity or the minimum value in order to consider something to be theft. And we've learned already that if it's even, according to Jewish law, it would have to be a certain minimum value. And that's what they call a pruta, which is the smallest coin that would be available. It might be 1 penny or it might be a dime, depending upon however it is the Jewish court determines is the smallest value. And within the Noahide laws, there is no concept of measurement. And therefore, anything that would be considered of value, even if it's less than a penny, would still be under the prohibition of theft. It would be a liability under the prohibition of theft. However, if something is ownerless, such as a sliver of wood taken off of a crate, which would be considered of no value at all, then it would not be considered a liability as theft. So continuing in section number 4. If the item taken is so small that no one would be concerned about it, for example, if one pulled a sliver of wood from another's crate or fence to use for picking his teeth, such a thing is permissible, and there is no prohibition of theft involved. Nevertheless, it is a righteous characteristic to hold oneself back from this as well. This is only said about pulling off 1 or 2 slivers of wood, which the owner would not be concerned with at all. But if many people would come and each would pull off 1 sliver, and through that the whole piece of wood would be destroyed, it is obvious that in such a case, this would matter very much to the owner, and it is forbidden as theft. So if a person just comes by and takes off 1 sliver of wood, that would not be considered theft. It's off a crate. It's not something like a mahogany desk where a sliver of wood would cause damage to the desk, but it's off a crate where a sliver of wood would not matter. But if we're in a society where people do that a lot, then it's going to cause a problem, and then there would have to be the civil courts would have to intervene to prevent that from happening. If a bunch of people taking off slivers of wood off of someone's crate or off a fence would be something that the civil courts would have to make rules about, and it might even be considered theft in such a society. See Beit Yosef and Sefer Miriat Imayim Koshen Mishpat 359:4, that the reason for the righteous practice of not taking a stalk of straw from a bundle is that the owner would end up losing his whole bundle if many people did this. Their wording implies that there is no actual prohibition for an individual to do this within Torah law, but it appears that this only constitutes a righteous practice. If one single person is refraining from taking the stock because the owner would not mind this minimum loss. But if there's actually many people involved and each one taking out 1 stock, surely the owner would mind this. And it is either theft or an extortion perpetuated by a multitude, which is clearly forbidden. And if it's a multitude, that would make it, something that the courts would have to address, because it's a social issue rather than an individual issue. And the courts would have to intervene in that case to improve society. Surely the owner would mind this, it is also explained in Midrash Rabbah in Genesis chapter 31 that the sin of extortion of the generation of the flood was that a merchant would bring out a box of beans, and each person would come and take 1 bean, less than a pruta in value, without paying until the box was emptied. So another factor is whether or not the owner is going to care. If the owner is not going to care if someone comes along and takes one bean, well, he might. If you're in a retail store and someone comes along and just picks a little bit of fruit, less than a pruta, whatever that's considered, off of his shelf and eats it, he may require the person to pay for it. He may care. In which case, stealing that would be considered theft. So a lot of this, in the Jewish law, they define what a pruta is. They define what the minimum amount is in order to reduce ambiguity. There's a certain amount of ambiguity in the Noahide law as to whether or not something is of a value or if something is of no value. And that's sort of the standard, and there's a certain subjectiveness to it. So it requires in that area for the courts to determine what the rules are. Similarly, regarding a vessel that is made of many small pieces, such that each piece alone is not considered to have any monetary value, it is still forbidden to take even one piece from the vessel. For if many people were to come and take just one piece, the whole vessel would be entirely destroyed. And this certainly would matter to the owner. Bin Ish Kai on the Torah portion, key 70. So again, but in this area, if it's just one person doing it, and it's not a continuing thing that keeps happening to the victim, then it might be allowed by Torah law, but it would still be better not to do it. It is forbidden as an improper practice that people should avoid, even taking a straw out of a bundle, just to pick his teeth or to hold in it, just have a piece of straw. If it's not his, he shouldn't be doing it. Likewise, regarding stores that provide plastic or paper bags in the checkout line for customer purchases, if in the eyes of society, one such bag is not considered to have any monetary value, then the owner would surely not be concerned if one bag were taken without permission. Nevertheless, it is forbidden to take even one shopping bag without the permission of the owner. For if many it is not sufficient to ask permission from the store employee who is not authorized to decide on behalf of the owner. If one does not get proper permission to take the bag, he can avoid theft by making a small purchase. So if a person needs a bag, he wants the bag to hold his whatever, and he walks into the store. If he just takes a bag, he's not supposed to do that, even though it might not be a prosecutable offense. It would not carry liability, but it's still not proper to just go into the store and just take a bag. And he can ask permission from the cashier. The question is whether or not the cashier has the ability to give permission from the take the bag. Now, in a lot of stores, the cashier would have, a lot of stores, the store owner is going to allow cashiers a certain amount of flexibility because they want to make everybody happy, so people shop there. They want it to be a happy, a place that people have good experiences in. So the cashier might be allowed to give the person a bag, especially if it's if it's something of hardly any expense. But that has to be a store where the cashier has that permission, and it might have to go to the manager, it might have to go to the owner. However that store is run, that's would be whether or not the person can give permission to give away a bag. For if many people would come along and each one were to take one bag without making a purchase, the owner would suffer monetary loss, and this certainly matters to him. So another possibility is they offer, you pay a penny and you get a bag. So the guy needs a bag, or maybe the guy has a sniffly nose and wants to get a napkin from a fast food place. If the policy is you give us a penny and we'll consider it okay, and the person would be happy to give a penny if he needs a bag. I'm sure he'll be willing to give a penny for the bag. So that's another possibility how a store could operate. And most stores would probably allow it, but you have to be cautious to make sure that that you're actually allowed to do that. You can't just assume that it's okay. This is not comparable to the case of pulling off slivers of wood, since it is unlikely that more than one person would come along and take slivers. Well, that's okay. So because that depends entirely on the culture, it depends entirely on the situation. There might be a situation where everyone's taking slivers of wood. It might be right after lunch break, and everyone has food in their mouths, and they're all taking slivers of wood. It becomes a custom where people do that. Well, that could become a problem. Then it'll be similar to the bags, or it could be a society that doesn't really use bags. They all have big pockets, or whatever it is, and so it depends on the situation in this area. So if it's unlikely, and therefore the owner would not mind. But if it is an unusual occurrence for almost all the customers to take. If it is a usual occurrence for almost all customers to take a bag from the store for their purchases, causing expense to the merchant, then surely the merchant would mind when people who are not buying the merchandise from the store would take bags. So it all depends on the local what's happening in that situation, and in which case the slivers of wood in the bags would in fact be this. It depends on what's going on. If it's a difficulty, if allowing people to take bags creates a problem because everyone then knows, hey, that store gives away free bags, and everyone goes in to get bags, and that becomes a burden on the owner. Or if everyone's coming along and taking slivers of wood, and eventually the guy's fence falls apart or his crate falls apart, that would be a burden. So if it's a burden, then it's of value, and then it would be forbidden, at least from a proper ethics. It would not be proper to have the manners of taking the slivers of wood or the bags. But if it's in a place where it does not create a burden for the owner, then it's not a big deal, and it would not be a liability in a court in such a case. Topic number 5. If a first Gentile steals something that is worth even less than a pruta, and the second Gentile comes and steals it from him, both of them are thieves and are liable to capital punishment because of theft. Rambam, Laws of Kings 9:9, from Tractate of Avodah Zarah 71b. Even though Rambam, like his source in Avodah Zarah 71b, uses the case of an item worth less than a pruta, the example is given to show the full extent of the law, which surely would apply to theft of any item worth more than a pruta. So if a person, the store puts up a sign says you cannot, taking bags is not permitted. The guy walks into the store and he takes a bag. He's a thief. And he would be liable to capital punishment for stealing that bag. And if someone else sneaks up next to him and takes his bag, the bag that he stole, the second person would also be liable for capital punishment in the court of law, because the bag is considered to be of some value, because a sign was put up saying do not take the bags. If the stolen item is still in the original condition, the first thief therefore has not fully acquired it. And this will be discussed further on. We learn about the laws of acquisition at least as it applies to non-Jews. We learn about the laws of acquisition within this unit. And so if the person has not done what is necessary to acquire, to make it his property as opposed to the original owner's property, meaning he hasn't changed what it is, he hasn't taken a board and turned it into a chair or something to that effect, where it can no longer be turned back into a board. Okay, so it's not been fully acquired. But if it has not been physically changed while in the first thief's possession, the Torah law requires he must return the stolen object intact to its original owner instead of making a monetary reimbursement, as will be explained in chapter 2. Still, even in this case, the second thief is guilty of theft. So, Radvaz on Laws of Kings 9:9, the author postulates that Radvaz, the author being Rabbi Moshe, Rabbi Weiner, who wrote the Sheva Mitzvahs books, the author postulates that Radvaz rules this way because although the first thief does not rightfully own the object, the fact that he plans to benefit from it and the second thief steals this benefit from him is enough to make the second thief liable. That is, he causes financial loss to the first thief. So if the person steals a board, and okay, so he's liable, the first thief is liable to capital punishment for stealing a board. If the second thief steals the board from him, the second thief is also liable. If the first thief steals the board and then builds a chair out of the board, and the second thief, okay, so now it no longer is the board. The second thief comes along and steals the chair. Both the first thief and the second thief are still liable for capital punishment in a court of law because both of them are thieves. And even if what is stolen is less than a pruta, less than if it's even a minimal value that somebody would care about, they would still be liable in either case. However, if someone took the stolen item from a thief, even by robbery or theft, and to save it and return it to the rightful owner, he is not liable. So somebody sees the thief steal the board, and he goes up to the thief, either indirectly to the thief, or he breaks into the house in the middle of the night and takes the board. In whatever way, he takes the board back. Now, that person has just committed the act that would appear to be thievery, but because he intends to give it back to the owner, he would not be liable in a court of law because he intended to return it to the rightful owner. Which makes you wonder, how does he understand? How is it understood that what the motivation is? This is also discussed in Miri on Tractate of Avodah Zarah 71b. But how do we know? He should try to do so openly to avoid the appearance of hidden theft, and he would need to prove his intent to be exempted by the court. So he can't just can't just say to the court afterwards, "Oh, I was planning to return it," because there needs to be a way the court knows that that's what he was planning to do. For example, with witnesses who were told what he would do and why. So if he told witnesses that he planned to go in and get the board, the stolen object, return it to the rightful owner, now the witnesses are going to hold him accountable. The witnesses know that's what he plans on doing. If he doesn't do it, then the witnesses know that at least he took the board or he took the stolen object. So it would surely not be considered theft if the owner took back his own object from the thief. And the details of these points are explained in chapter 4. So if the owner, and it has to be known that he's the owner. There has to be a way that he can show that he's the owner of the stolen object. You can't, because otherwise the thief could claim that the first thief who originally stole the object could claim it belonged to him. There has to be a way that the original owner can prove that it's his object in order for him to be not himself held liable in a court of law. And that'll be discussed more in chapter 4. Right now we're in chapter 1, so we're kind of doing an overview that will be discussed in more detail further on in the unit. Or Shemayak, laws of Sukkah 5:25. Likewise, Minhag Kinuk, commandment 224, explains that for a Gentile there is no prohibition to take one's own items back from a thief. So people are allowed to take back their items from a thief. They just have to be able to show, if the thief contacts the court and says, "Hey, that guy stole my object," the board, this is a board that was in my house, and this guy comes along and takes my board, and he did it blatantly, he did it in front of everybody. And the guy says, no, the person that did that says, no, he's the original owner. There has to be a way to prove that he's the original owner. Otherwise, it's assumed that the board or the object belonged to the person who was possessing it, which would have been the original thief. So it becomes very, very difficult it becomes very technical and you got to be cautious how this is done. So it'll be discussed more in the later chapter in this section. Thank you.